Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Twilight Zone Best and Worst of Season 4. As always, I have reviewed all 18 Season 4 episodes, and I'm ready to tell you which ones I thought were the best and which ones you should probably avoid unless you are watching the entire series. And just a few notes about Season 4. These were the hour-long Twilight Zone episodes. And overall, I think that the hour format kind of gave mixed results. There were a couple really great episodes, but there were a lot of episodes that felt kind of slow and kind of padded and were either average or below average. Like I said, there were some exceptions. There were a few great hour-long episodes, which I'll talk about here in a minute. But overall, I'm kind of glad that Season 5 is going back to a half hour. I think for this particular show, the half-hour format probably works best. And another note I just want to quickly make is that normally I do a top 5 and a bottom 5 for the season, but because Season 4 was only 18 episodes instead of the normal 36 or 37 that other seasons have, I have decided to do a top 3 and a bottom 3 simply because there's less episodes and I feel that that helps these episodes to stand out more. So, with that said, as always, I will start with the worst first. And at number 3 for the worst Twilight Zone episodes of Season 4 is Jess-Belle. Now, this was an episode that tried to tell some kind of folk tale, which is all fine and good, except I didn't think the execution of it was very good at all. I felt that the lead character had strange motivation and didn't really think through her choices. Therefore, even though she tried to gain our sympathy, she kind of just brought everything on herself, so the character didn't really work for me. The episode also has this odd folk song running through it that I didn't like. It also has very odd pacing, and the biggest problem with this episode, however, for me was something I call character convenience, meaning that a lot of the characters just seem to be in certain scenes or act a certain way to forward the plot. They weren't very realistic motivations, they were just there because the plot needed them to be. I also thought the special effects were particularly ineffective. I'm not judging them based on the technology. I realize special effects have come a long way since the 1960s, but I didn't think they were used effectively is my big problem. And I also thought the ending and behind how the end of the episode was done was just kind of basically silly. Some good acting, they did what they could with it. Stops this episode from being even higher up on the list. At number 2, I Dream of Genie. It's one thing to have an unfunny half-hour Twilight Zone comedy. It's another thing to have an unfunny hour Twilight Zone comedy. I really didn't think very much about this episode was funny. The concept is not very original. If you're going to do the genie granting wishes thing, I feel you need to put a better twist on it than what was done here. I also thought the fantasy scenes just kind of didn't go anywhere and were too long in this episode. Basically, the ending twist might seem clever, but to me it really didn't make a lot of sense in the context of the episode, as I've explained before. And basically the whole episode just comes across as kind of pointless. I don't think that the acting or directing really helps it that much either. And at number 1, though, is The Incredible World of Horace Ford. This episode was incredible, all right, but not in a good way. It's incredible that Twilight Zone thought that this was all that interesting, to be honest. Besides the episode not being that interesting, I felt the lead character was completely unlikable and unrealistic, and I will explain that further. It is one thing to have an unlikable character. I believe it can work. You don't always have to love your lead character, but when they are unrealistic and over the top, it just doesn't work. The other big problem with this episode is that it is very repetitive writing and directing. We see the same scenes over and over again, only adding very little, not enough each time for my liking. And I just think the whole structure of the episode is just very questionable and repetitive. And I also think the ending's pretty mediocre, and I'm not sure that I really buy that it's worth sitting through this episode to get there. I'm not really sure if you should blame the acting, writing, or directing on this the most, so I'll just blame all 3 equally and say stay away from The Incredible World of Horace Ford unless you're a completionist and watching every episode, because it's not very good. Okay, so on to bigger and better things. I feel like these 3 episodes prove that the hour format can work for the show. because these 3 episodes were very good, especially number 1. But I will start with number 3, The New Exhibit. This episode had a great lead performance and memorable character, and let me just say this is the difference between an episode like Incredible World of Horace Ford. I don't think the main character is particularly good or likable in this episode, but because the performance is so good and the character is written realistically and his motivations are more subtle, he becomes somewhat likable, and even if he isn't, we buy him as a lead character. That's the difference. It's a perfect example right there, in my opinion. The episode also has a nice atmosphere. I like the concept with the wax figures. It works for the most part. And I think although the twist looks particularly predictable to today's audience, I think it was a great twist at the time, and the way the episode hides it works very, very well. The episode also has solid direction overall, so no real complaints. The New Exhibit is a really good episode, especially if you're into the 60s horror fantasy style of writing and show. At number 2, In His Image. This was the very first episode of the season, and it was only topped once for better or worse, in my opinion. The 2 leads have very good chemistry. They're very believable as a couple. I felt the build of their relationship was interesting and realistic. I also thought the twist was thought-provoking and nicely done, and the episode is paced very well for an hour episode. It allows enough time for characterization, but it doesn't pad us with a lot of unnecessary scenes that are irrelevant to the episode, which is a problem in some of the episodes of this season. I also feel like we really care what happens in this episode, and it's worth it to get to the end. So, all in all, In His Image is an excellent hour-long episode. But really, number 1, this was an easy choice for me, and it is On Thursday We Leave for Home, which I consider not only the best hour-long episode, but one of the best Twilight Zone episodes ever. And like I did in my review, I will explain why. First of all, I feel like it's one of Rod Serling's best scripts. It makes a lot of statements, but it does not come across as preachy. It is done in a balanced enough way for it to work. James Whitmore gives one of the greatest Twilight Zone performances, in my opinion, and Benteen is one of the most recognizable and memorable characters, both due to the writing and acting. This is exactly how you write a complex lead character and make it work. This is one of those episodes that feels like a short film to me, which is a compliment. I think this could easily stand on its own as a movie. I like the subtle balance and the character shifts. They don't just quickly go from one thing to another to serve the plot. That is why I feel the hour format fits this episode, because everything is done in a natural way and it doesn't feel rushed, but it doesn't feel padded either. I also feel like the ending is one of the best in all of Twilight Zone. I was very gripped by it. I thought it was very powerful, and I felt a lot of this episode, which is a good thing, meaning I was really invested. I felt like I was there when I was watching it. And I also feel it's an episode that brings up discussion. It's very thought-provoking, which is a good thing. And I think some of the messages are still relevant today in this episode, which is also good. Messages about what it really means to be a leader or not a leader, messages about ideals and whether it's always good to stick with them or if sometimes it's good to change them. And whatever you think about these issues, I feel the episode does a good job of making you think about them. So all in all, I highly recommend On Thursday We Leave for Home and think it is a must-watch Twilight Zone episode. Probably the only must-watch episode of Season 4, but I do think that New Exhibit, In His Image, and also Valley of the Shadow, which I would give an honorable mention, are also very much worth watching. So overall, Season 4 is a mixed bag, but I do think there's a lot of good here, and it seems like the Season 4 episodes are kind of given a short straw. Doesn't seem like a lot of people watch them or really talk about them from what I know. So this is kind of to help you out with some of the ones that I liked, and hopefully you'll like them too. If you have watched the hour-long episodes, I would love to hear some comments about if I'm right, if I'm wrong, if I picked the episodes you like, if I left any out, or maybe if I was too hard on a couple as well. That's all fair game. And as always, thank you very much for watching, and I will be starting Season 5 reviews very soon. Thanks.